Hey everyone, welcome back to What's Next, brought to you by the Circle Club. I'm Tyrone, here with your host, Mr. Corey. Today we're talking about episode 2 of Moonlight, Summon the Suit. Corey, what were your thoughts on episode 2?
Yeah, initial thoughts. The thing I cared about most was just moving the yardsticks forward a little bit, right? Trying to understand this dynamic between Mark, Steven, Khonshu, like what's going on there, right? Like they gave us a good understanding of like just what's kind of going on with his situation, but now we're really diving into the whole dynamics of it and understanding how it's all really working. And that's something I really cared about. So I'm glad that they ripped right into this. So that was something I really liked.
Yeah, and like I've been kind of back and forth a little bit about the series. Like I'm enjoying it, but not like over enthralled by it. But like I think the slow pace is what's gonna help this kind of take it out. Like the first episode, I think we're kind of establishing where he is. Then we're kind of establishing the powers, the dynamic between the different alters or avatars as they call them. And then I think in this next episode we see will start to be more plot driven about what are we going to do about this Khonshu and Amit situation. But any other things come to your mind throughout this episode?
Yeah, I think a lot of like the things I want to go into detail about are all revolved around that and the dynamics of different characters. So I think what we should do is let's start with the villain first. Let's get him out the way right off the bat. So Arthur Harrow, right? Like something that stood out to me, right, in the first episode was that it was very Thanos-like, right? He wanted to see this judgment in getting rid of bad people. But something that you notice later on in this episode is when he gets that scarab from the homeless person, he doesn't judge them. He just takes whatever their life force is. So that's a true indication of a real villain who's blinded by his path right now, right? And I think you get a little bit more insight into the fact that he used to be Khonshu's avatar. So I think there's a little resentment there as well between the situation with Mark.
I also think it's really interesting too how there's this whole thing of Amit who thinks that you should judge someone before they make the action, whereas Khonshu thinks that you have to kill them or take an action after they've done something negative, which is interesting because the superheroes that we've known and grown to love, like and the Avengers, their whole thing is killing that's crossing the line, despite if someone does something before, after, whatever, you can never cross that line. So I think what we'll see as Mark or Moon Knight, he is kind of that middle ground between the two. And I think ultimately what we'll see is he's kind of the voice of reason, and kind of brings us all back into that superhero consciousness of, hey, no matter how bad things get, you can't kill.
Yeah, and I think that's going to be something that people really like about this as well, and the difference between a lot of what you've seen with the MCU and them trying to push those boundaries, right? Like we have a character who's really willing to cross that line, right? The way like he kills that dog demon at the end, right? Like we don't really see that happen in MCU. So and we're only in episode 2, right? So like again, it's moving a little slow, but we're getting tastes of things we've never really seen before, right? And I think that's very enjoyable, right? I think you and me have both agreed. We haven't had like those wow moments, but we're getting a lot of elements that are very intriguing and very interesting, right?
And I'll take that, like not having that wow moment if you're expanding the rules of what the MCU is, right? Like for Loki, it was a little slow to start, but it was like, okay, now we have new rules to play with. And I think that's what they did with these first 2 episodes is, okay, now we're talking spirits, we're talking people who can't see things, we're talking DID and mental health. So like unreliable narrator, which is something we don't see a ton in the Marvel universe as well, because usually you can rely on the narrator, the hero's journey, the hero's story. So yeah, we're getting a lot of cool new elements in this. Something else that came up was this new character, Layla. What did you think about that?
Yeah, so I think that's the wild card situation, right? Like I think it's very easy for like Mark to stay fixated on what he needs to do with Khonshu and then just dealing with whatever the Steven situation is, right? Like he's kind of had that under control, right? Clearly with him getting strapped to the bed, like never really like having his things in order. Like Mark's clearly been the one in control, even though Steven's living his life. I think now that Layla's in the situation, it completely complicates everything, right? Because it's his love interest, right? So he's worried about her being hurt. But really how much of a twist it is in theory, Mark is getting blackmailed by the avatar that we think is good, right? Like Khonshu, we're looking at this as the good against Amit, but at the end of the day, this guy's in theory blackmailing his avatar to stay his avatar, right? So Mark must be about that game, and I better be seeing that throughout the series for him to want to keep him around.
I agree, and I also think it's interesting too. That's like you have this character Mark who seems like, I don't know, spiritual or some sort of being, and it's like, okay, what's Layla's dynamic there? Like, is she also tapped into that universe? Because I thought it was weird when she said, I thought you were putting on this alias or something like that. I was like, well, for months you thought he was doing that? That's a little weird. But at the same time, it's like, that shows you if she believed that her man would hide for months without communicating with her, that's how shows you how Khonshu is not like, you know, you're the typical people that we've dealt with in the Marvel universe. And you mentioned that you were kind of getting a little bit of Venom vibes about that to me. Like, you want to go into a little more depth about that?
Yeah, so I got actually two things kind of stemming off that. I'll address the Venom thing that you're talking about, right? So I think last episode I talked about Deadpool vibes, right, with the music and things that were going on. We didn't feel a lot of that narration that you got from Venom in Venom, right? And now we're starting to see a little bit more of that. I think with the type of interactions they're having too, where he's like basically telling him to rip his esophagus out, right? I think you're gonna get a lot more of that, and it plays right into what I wanted to talk about before, about that poster reference, right? For some reason last episode that 7 gods on there, and there's actually 9, and 2 being left off stuck with me, right? And I think this leads to where Khonshu and Amit is, and we were looking at Khonshu as the good side and Amit as the bad side until like what I just said with the blackmailing. There might be a reason why Amit and Khonshu are left out, right? Because back to the mythology of how they described it, Anubis is really the one that should be passing judgment. So are these guys kind of going out of line and kind of getting out of their lane a little too much here? And
it's kind of like in the Bible or something where it's like, you know, you aren't God, so you can't make some of those actions or determine if someone was going to get into heaven, hell, whatever. You can interpret the readings, but you can't make those judgment calls. Yeah, so I agree. That's a really, really, and that's also something very new for Marvel to play with. So I'm excited to see that as well. All right, guys, so there is a lot going on in this series. But Corey, do you have any last questions, thoughts, thinking about episode 3? Obviously, we can't hit everything in such a short amount of time, but is there anything like on your mind?
Yeah, I would say 2 quick things that are on my mind is first, how his suit and just powers in general are going to work, right? We know Mark is a mercenary, so he has that fighting and probably all that combat ability, but we know about the suit in the sense of it has some type of protection to it, but how far does his powers really go? Like, how much does he really get out of these Khonshu abilities that he has, right?
It reminds me a little bit of like the Doctor Strange cape a little bit, like it seems like it's almost alive on its own, or sort of has like this kind of protection spell around it. Yeah.
And I think it plays into the fact of like Steven not really knowing about it, and he just puts together this random suit that looks wicked clean, right? Like there's something there, right? I think that's a great example with the Doctor Strange cape. And the only other thing that I'm wondering is these avatars, right? Now we've really established the fact that these entities can take over these bodies and give them powers, right? So it's not really the mutants we've been looking for, but it's a whole new aspect to how these characters can get powers, so to speak, beyond what we're typically used to. So I'm interested to see when these other avatars come into play, but also the fact that these characters pretty much are never out of play because they can always pass the torch to a new avatar, right? So it's very, very intriguing, this whole dynamic with avatars. I want to see where it leads to.
What would you give this episode out of a 5?
Yeah, you know, I think I'm going to give it a consistent score with what I saw episode 1. I'm going to give it a 4.2 out of 5. I really enjoyed it. I think it gave us more of the information we needed. It's not maybe moving as fast as some people want, but this is the enjoyment of having a TV show. You can get a little bit more into the details. You don't have to rush things like a movie, right? So I'm really enjoying where they're going with it. I'm enjoying a lot of the things like I talked about that are new aspects to the MCU. And I want to just keep it going. Let's keep it going. I want to see some wow factor though soon.
Yeah, I think I would probably give it a 3.9. Like I said last time, I was a 3.9 to start. I rewatched it and I bumped it up to 4.1. But for now, I'm at a 3.9. I think that some of the scenes with Arthur kind of went on a little bit longer than I would have expected to see. Again, I think a lot of what is happening is necessary, but it's just a different pace. It's new. There aren't other Avengers flying around. So it's just a new style that takes getting used to. But I definitely recommend watching this twice. But all right, guys, that's going to do it for this episode. Make sure you subscribe down below and comment. Let us know what you thought about episode 2. Check out our key takeaways from episode 2 over on the Circle Club. Corey, what's next?
Up next, you'll be back with us next week, episode 3 of Moonlight. We'll be talking about it. So make sure, like Tyrone said, you follow, subscribe, do what you got to do so you stay with us. We'll see you guys next week.